Isidor and Ida Straus were one of America's wealthiest couples, and their death shook the Western world. How did Ida die? And what precious object was recovered after the sinking? And what was the relationship between George Rosenshine and Gertrude Mabel Thorne? And then there is the story of the Addergoole 14, traveling to America to find a new life on the steamship RMS Titanic. Will they survive? All this on Titanic, Stories from the Deep. The wreck of RMS Titanic was discovered 3,800 meters deep in the Atlantic Ocean. Over 5,500 artifacts and personal items have since been recovered, all reminders of the passengers and crew who set sail that fateful day. These objects tell very real stories of love, survival, mystery, and fate. This is Titanic, Stories from the Deep. She was the largest and most opulent ocean liner of the time. Launched in 1912, the White Star Line built Titanic not for speed, but for luxury. Travel in each of the three classes was above and beyond that on any other ship. Third-class passengers, most of whom were immigrants on their way to America, enjoyed better food and better beds than they had ever known in their lives. On the other end of the scale, the opulence of first class was unparalleled for ships of that era. What did these two classes have in common? Love. Love for one another, love of family, love that lasts to this very day. When Titanic struck the iceberg and the call came to abandon ship, it was women and children first. In first class, there were 144 women. They had the best chance of survival. Their cabins were closer to the lifeboats, and their status gave them extra consideration from the crew. And yet, 4 women from first class died that April night, including Ida Straus. Ida Straus was the wife of well-known American businessman Isidor Straus. She clearly would have been offered a place in a lifeboat. So why did she die? To understand her death, we must first understand her life and the love story of Ida and Isidor Straus.
They both were born in Germany and came here as young children. They met when they were sort of set up by those who felt that they might be compatible, and pretty much from the very beginning, they developed a fondness for one another.
Isidor and Ida were, I think, really an extraordinary and unusual couple. Their relationship was one of total devotion, always.
We have 3 boxes filled with letters. Every time they were separated, they wrote letters every single day.
And it's so clear that their admiration for one another, their love for one another, their partnership was extraordinary, especially for that time.
It was really the Victorian era, and people did not write about sexuality, about sex. And yet we have one letter that Ida expresses to Isidor that she's excited that their being apart is about to be over and that they can resume their lovemaking, that she was looking forward to a time when they can be intimate together. This is very, very unusual for that period.
I am rather late for the mail again. We do so much talking all morning, and I have exceptionally deferred my most pleasant duty to the last minute. I am so glad our imaginary lovemaking will soon be at an end, and that we will not require writing paper as our intermediary anymore. Your devotedly, Mama.
They really cherished one another. I know that's kind of an old-fashioned thing to say, but I think it's suitable. Theirs was, in fact, a love story, because I think they really set a model for those of us who are among their descendants.
Isidor was a merchant. He was an owner of Macy's, along with his brother, Nathan. Isidor was always known as Mr. Isidor, and he knew every single one of his employees by name. The employees were very fond of him and very grateful for this wonderful job. They treated them very well. At Macy's, they had the first mutual aid society. They had the first doctor and nurse on the premises for their employees. Isidor was a friend to many presidents, but also a consultant. He did many, many things. In 1911, they still had a lot of family, both of them, in Germany. And so they decided that they were able to take a winter abroad. Then when it was getting to be early April, they were starting to feel it was time to come home. But there was a coal strike going on at that time.
Because of the coal strike, White Star Line diverted coal and passengers from other ships, so Titanic could make her maiden voyage as scheduled on April 10th, 1912.
So really the reason they were on Titanic is because it was one of the only ships going at that point. When they got to the ship, Ida wrote a thank you letter. And we have that letter, which is on Titanic stationery, and it is the last letter that she wrote. It describes the ship. She says, oh, what a ship. These aren't really cabins. These are wonderful rooms, this suite of rooms that we have, and they're so lovely. And then the letter was mailed in Cherbourg, where Titanic stopped to drop off mail, pick up food and supplies and other passengers. And so we have this letter with such a wonderful description of the surroundings.
Titanic was a three-class system. You had the upper class traveling in first, you had the middle class traveling in second, and you had immigrants traveling in third. The White Star Line, her owners, had realized that speed was kind of a dead end. So what happened was the White Star Line said, let's concentrate on luxury. And so when the Olympic and Titanic and the Britannic were all designed, the emphasis was on spaciousness, elegance, refinement of design, and novelty in amenities.
There was a style to traveling in first class, with many passengers bringing their servants and a complete wardrobe so that their dress would suit the elegance of their seagoing surroundings. Some of the artifacts recovered and conserved from the debris field surrounding Titanic reveal fascinating details about the people who were on board and their standard of dress while on Titanic.
So we have a man's collapsible top hat. Right now there's a support that keeps it in this position as we're showing it for exhibitions as well as for the safety and travel. With the textiles, once we get the saline out, once we get all the salt out, we want to make sure there are no other impurities in there. So for example, in the debris field, you have a lot of the metal corrosive bacteria. That's what's destroying the Titanic at this time. And you can look at some of the textiles that have been conserved and kind of get an idea just by looking at them, how close they were to all of that metal that was rusting. This is made of primarily silk. What we have on the top of the hat right now is this discoloration, and this has been in close proximity to the rust that's breaking down the metal of the Titanic and has weeped onto the fabric, causing degradation. Another good reason for having the mount on the inside to give it support so it doesn't put pressure on these weak threads. So that's an issue that needs to be addressed, making sure that bacteria is gone. So this is the liner that was inside the hat that tells where the hat came from. All right, so the label from the inside is Herbert Johnson, 38 New Bond Street in London.
An exclusive shop in London, likely frequented by a wealthy first-class passenger, although we do not know this for sure, or indeed who the hat actually belonged to.
First class were kept in the luxury to which they had become accustomed. Even though they had the best of everything and all they could possibly want, keeping them happy for 4 or 5 days on an ocean liner could be a little bit of a task. I think also something needs to be said for third class. This was not exactly a vacation for third class, but it was as close as they were probably going to get. You didn't have to get up at 4 in the morning and milk the cows. It was a different world.
The story of Titanic is, to some degree, the story of the worldwide immigration that took place in the early 20th century as the world economy shifted from agriculture to industry. While first and second class received most of the attention, Titanic was also built to carry immigrants who were dreaming of a better life in America. This was especially true for the many Irish who were leaving their country in droves. This trinket, painted with shamrocks, was found in Titanic's debris field. It's believed to be a keepsake of Ireland, a memory for someone who recently traveled there or something a young girl might carry with her to remind her of her Irish homeland. This artifact will travel with Alex Klingelhofer to Ireland and the small country parish of Addergoole, where over 100 years after the sinking of Titanic, a memorial is still held every April 15th.
Well, in the early 1900s, they had just got over the most terrible century we've ever had, when we had a desperate famine. In fact, 1/3 of the population died. And after that, then, there was nothing here. People kind of had to go. Usually, the oldest girl might go to America and send back a little bit of money. And eventually, the fare would be there for another girl to go. With the result that an awful lot of girls went from Ireland to America, that they would never again be seen in their homes. They were going never to come back.
For most of the Addergoole 14, this was their first time beyond their tiny parish, their first time in large crowds of people, and their very first time sailing on a ship. Today, we can only imagine their excitement at leaving for the new world. Their bravery is inspiring. But would they survive Titanic's fate, now only 3 days away? Here in this top-secret warehouse in Atlanta lie artifacts recovered from the wreck site that reveal incredible stories of Titanic. The collection of artifacts, painstakingly maintained by the Salver in Possession of the Titanic Wreck, EMG, contains clues on the clear definition between the 3 classes on Titanic. These plates, recovered from the ocean floor, were used to serve passengers on board Titanic.
First, you have the first class here. This wasn't actually used in the dining saloon. We believe this belonged to the special service, which would have been used to serve meals in the cabins. You can see it's got a wonderful cobalt blue and gold decoration. It has the Oceanic Steam Navigation Company monogram in the center of it, and that was the parent organization of White Star Line. This decoration was able to survive immersion in the salt water, whereas the other chinas washed away, so all we can see is a haze of what they looked like. It's interesting to note that every single piece of china that were provided to the Titanic was not stamped with anything that said Titanic. So if anything says Titanic, it's a fake. This china, the blue and white Delft, was used in second class. It's a beautiful pattern that is still produced today. The decal, which was the swallowtail flag and banner for the White Star Line, you can see has faded a bit. That's because it's a decal and applied later. This is the third class ware. This is a soup bowl. They had a lot of stews and soup in third class. You have some of the staining that occurred being associated with iron objects.
Objects found near the rusting metal of Titanic often picked up staining caused by the rust.
For instance, on this one, you have the iron stain. One could try to get rid of that, but to be honest, you probably never would, because that's now into the fabric of the plate. But there are other types of treatments that can remove it so it's lessened, and that's what we've done here.
The term parish is used by the church to refer to a group of villages within a geographical area and serviced by one priest. The 14 passengers from the parish of Addergoole in Western Ireland were either related to each other or already knew each other. And for each of them, this voyage would change their lives forever.
Addergoole 14 were 14 people who decided to emigrate to America, the promised land as it is over here. They preferred to go to America rather than go to the UK. UK was kind of hard industrial scenario, whereas the America was the place to go.
You know, my uncle Pat, he was 21 years of age, and he was the 5th in a family of 7. Well, there was no work here for them. They'd only came from a very small farm, so they had to immigrate to America.
The cost of even a third-class ticket to cross the Atlantic was a huge expense for a family of modest means. It could take them months to save up enough money.
It was said that my Uncle Pat was saying goodbye to his mother, and she passed him a gold sovereign. And the sovereign slipped from his hand and it dropped to the floor, which they said at the time that was bad luck. And unfortunately, it was for him.
So the process of conservation for Titanic had to be really developed because it's considered a deep water site, and not many artifacts had been recovered from deep water sites. When an object is recovered, the process was immediately to photograph it, measure it on the expedition ship, and assign a permanent number to it. And then bag it in water from the site, and then it was transferred in seawater to a land laboratory. I think each artifact that is recovered from the wreck site of Titanic has something important to say. It may be about how something was manufactured, it might be how an object was used. First of all, I love Ireland. I think it's a beautiful country, and I think the immigration from Ireland to America greatly influenced how our country grew. This seems to me to be a small souvenir of Ireland with the shamrock. It appears to be just, a small little trinket dish that you'd put on your bureau, something you might put in a window ledge. Just something to remind you of Ireland, of home, of where you came from. It's like a little touchstone for someone.
The 14 went together and they thought this is a great way to do it, and it was a good idea. There were no experience of life, should we say. So going over to America was a huge challenge for them. It was such a tragedy they happened to get on to Titanic and not the Celtic the day after that, and the other liner that came in the day before. It was just bad, pure bad luck that they landed on Titanic.
If you were lucky and wealthy enough to be traveling in first class, your chance of survival was much greater than in third.
You know, my Uncle Pat, he was on the Titanic in steerage, and of course, when the Titanic was going down, the third-class passengers weren't able to get to the upper decks.
You get references to both types of stories. Those stories where the third-class passengers were helped, and the third-class passengers that say they were not helped. So I don't know that there's a way to get to the bottom truth of that. And people suffered for it, yes.
You have to understand that when Titanic began to sink, it was hell on earth for the poor things because of no idea where they were, what they were doing. They'd never been in crowds in their lives before.
Titanic had an evacuation suggestion. I wouldn't call it a plan. It was not completely thought out and regimented and rehearsed the way we do it today.
So they found a ladder that was leading to the upper decks. So to get to the lifeboats, they brought the Addergoole 14 and other people up to the upper decks.
They were some of the lucky ones. Well, I won't say lucky, but at the time they were the ones who got up onto the next level where the crew were rounding up the people to get on the various boats.
As it became clear the ship was going down, panic set in. Chaos and crowds threatened to overwhelm the Addergoole 14 as they fought their way to the lifeboat decks.
When they got to the last boat, which was lifeboat 16, and Kate Kelly got into that lifeboat.
In a way, it was a wonderful thing for us that Annie Kate got on. Because all the little stories, all the little bits and pieces that we know about the Titanic all came from Annie Kate.
And the last sight she saw was of Pat was waving goodbye to her with his rosary beads in his hand. That's the picture that's in the window, yes.
The scene was so horrifying that Annie Kate Kelly is said to have been haunted As the ship went down, it changed the direction of her life forever. In 1994, a leather satchel was retrieved from the debris field surrounding the wreck site. Conservation experts carefully worked on the objects found inside the satchel. They finally revealed the story of one couple's journey around the world. These documents also revealed that the couple's true relationship may have been considerably different than what they had led others on board to believe.
George Rosenshine and Gertrude Mabel Thorne, a very interesting couple, and they certainly were a couple, but they were not married as the fact they was travelling under Mabel's name would suggest. They were both travelling under the name of Thorne.
This document is from Thomas Cook & Son, who was the travel agent for George Rosenshine and Mabel Thorne. And it's from Yokohama, where they created their itineraries for the rest of their around the world tour.
It's very interesting that the paper survived, but we're very happy that it did. Number one, the paper at that time was rag paper, or better quality paper, so that helped a lot. Number two, it was recovered in leather suitcases, and the leather suitcases tended to protect the paper from the bacterial or microbial communities at the bottom of the ocean. It was very deep and dark and cold, which is another way to preserve organic material.
And we have a letter from his brother on Rosenshine Brothers Stationery. And that was the business that the three brothers had, which was started by their father. Just saying family things like, we received your letters, here's one to you, we're all glad you're having a wonderful time.
Thanks to the recovery and preservation of these documents, the exciting travels of these mysterious lovers was revealed.
He was a successful businessman, and she was a woman who loved travel, and so the two of them had just enjoyed a fantastic trip overseas where they'd taken in India and Japan and had, I think, thoroughly enjoyed every minute of it. And I think the suggestions are that they were very much in love.
The question is, however, if they were in love, why were they defying the Edwardian conventions of the day? Why weren't they married?
This is a curious question because as far as we know, at the time they joined Titanic, there was no obstacle. She had been married, but she, as far as we know, was no longer married. But that might have previously been a complication. There's also the factor that we're looking at an interfaith relationship, and it could be that his mother objected to him marrying out of the Jewish faith.
George and Mabel were not the only unmarried couple traveling together on the ship.
If you look at the passenger list of the Titanic, we find several instances in which there are couples either travelling as a married couple or of men who have installed their mistresses in separate cabins. And if we take that as a typical cross-section of people who were crossing the Atlantic, it seems that we see it in all three classes.
So it was a subterfuge, but it wasn't really a huge secret, other than, of course, they wouldn't tell everyone on board ship that they weren't married. They traveled as Mr. and Mrs. Thorne.
At approximately 11:40 on April 14, 1912, the Titanic struck an iceberg a few hundred miles off the coast of Newfoundland.
Like the majority of women who travelled first class, Mabel survived, but her partner, George, like many of the first class male passengers, did not. The telegram to George's brother that Mabel sent would suggest that Mabel was familiar with his family and in particular with his brother.
Pray God George was rescued by another boat with the rest of the men. Arrive Carpathia. Mabel Thorne.
And then I think the other telegram was to her sister, her own sister, in which she doesn't talk about George. So that may imply that her family was not aware of the relationship.
am safe. Arrive on Cunard, Carpathia. Gertrude.
Mabel survived, but what about the other female first-class passengers? Did they all survive?
Of the 144 first-class women aboard, only 4 perished in the disaster. One of the women who perished was Ida Straus. I think the story of Ida Straus is one of the most bittersweet stories of the Titanic that we know of, because she was on the verge of boarding a lifeboat.
Surrounded by chaos, shouting voices, and panic, Ida Straus stepped into a lifeboat, and yet she died. What happened to the beloved wife of Isidor Straus in the last moments of Titanic's life? Many stories have been passed down through the generations about the tragic events that unfolded after Titanic hit the iceberg. Survivors' accounts are varied and often conflict with one another. But one story that's always the same is the bittersweet tale of the final moments of Ida and Isidor Straus.
When word came down to evacuate the ship, response was mixed. It mostly depended on where you were in the ship. For instance, first class was fairly far removed from the seat of impact. Many people said they didn't feel anything. Many first class passengers were reluctant to actually evacuate. Titanic was warm and steady, and the lights didn't even blink. The feeling was, in many cases, it's the officers being overly protective, overly judicious. Now, in third class, where you're much closer to the impact, it was rather different. The ship actually did rattle, and many third-class passengers, especially the forward end of the ship, were very much aware that something was wrong, and they were very anxious to make their way to the top deck. Women and children first was a long-standing tradition. It's not codified anywhere. It was just the way gentlemen were expected to behave. It's no miracle that most first-class women survived. The lifeboats were on the first-class deck. Everybody knew how to get up to them, so most of them survived. Now, 4 first-class women did not survive. The most famous of these is Ida Straus.
When Titanic sank, they sent up flares and they sent out radio signals. And as it happened, there was a ship called Carpathia that was traveling in the other direction. And aboard the ship was a grocery buyer from Macy's called John Badenoch.
Dear Mr. Percy, as per your request, I submit herewith the facts as desired.
He wrote a very lengthy letter to one of the sons, Percy, describing the scene.
Realizing how anxious you would be to get the most accurate information about the last that was seen of your father and mother, I circulated among the survivors.
From this, we have really a very good understanding of what happened aboard Titanic in the very last moments with regard to the Strauses.
Ida entered one of the lifeboats, expecting that her husband would join her. She turned around and found that he was not coming into the lifeboat. She said, "Please, Isidor," and he said, "No, it's women and children first." She then said, "If you are not going to be in the lifeboat, I shall not be in the lifeboat. We have lived a wonderful life together, and in keeping with the spirit of the Book of Ruth, where thou go, I go, and if need be, we will perish together."
Your mother was asked by the officer in charge and urged by your father to get in one of the lifeboats. She refused to do so and insisted that the maid take her place in boat number 8.
She saw her maid and said, "Ellen, you must now get in to the lifeboat, but you will be cold in these frigid, iceberg-laden seas. I have no further need for this fur coat. And let me give it to you to keep you warm in the lifeboat until you're rescued." She had lived this wonderful life with Isidor, who loved her as much as she loved him, and that as they had lived their lives, together so they would perish together, in love, in each other's arms.
Your father and mother then walked to the opposite side of the ship, and when last seen were standing, clasped in each other's arms, calmly awaiting for any help that might come.
That form of death, I think, has not only perhaps a generosity, but to me, simply a beauty to it.
A lot of people died that night. I think you'd be very sorry to see a soul like Mrs. Straus go with them.
So Ellen Burr did survive, and after she came to New York, she brought the coat to their eldest daughter.
And that would be Sarah Straus Hess, my grandmother. And I remember I said to my grandmother, "So what did you say to Ellen?" And she said, "My mother gave this coat to you. This coat is yours. I want you to have it in my mother's memory."
Word didn't get back for way over a week later.
My relative was Annie McGowan. She was a cousin of my mother's. She got on a lifeboat, and she was lucky to be saved.
Of the 14 people who left from Addergoole, 11 died in the disaster and only 3 survived. The tragedy had long-term effects on the community.
It was an awful blow. My uncle, he never wanted to hear anything about the Titanic afterwards. Like if there was any mention of it, you could see the sadness in his face and his eyes would well up with tears. He didn't want to hear it. And that was the feeling all over.
Well, my grandmother was Pat's mother. When she went to bed, she was so depressed that she was in bed for a week or so after.
Of the 3 survivors, Annie Kate Kelly was the only one who ever returned to Ireland. After the disaster, she joined her sister and cousins in Chicago, where she became a nun and devoted her life to service. To honor their unique connection to the tragedy, the parish of Addergoole erected this memorial park in time for the 100th anniversary of Titanic's sinking.
It was traumatic. And that is why the Titanic Society was formed here in Athergole, that collectively, as a community, would remember those 14 people. Now, everything which was built here in the Memorial Park was built from stones from the homes of the 14 people.
After my great-grandparents died, a memorial service was held for them in the city. The turnout was so great, they simply could not accommodate everyone who wanted to be there. And thousands came to pay tribute to my great-grandparents.
To me, what's really dramatic is that if you research the outpouring of New York society when learning of their deaths, it's amazing. Every group that they ever gave money to, all their employees, everyone wrote to the family to express their grief over having lost this wonderful couple.
In Macy's, a plaque was erected by the employees, and this is the beautiful part. It was not by the members of the board of directors, it was not by shareholders. It's the employees through their employee association, with literally nickels and dimes, who raised the money to have a plaque of Isidor and Ida to be placed in the main entrance on 34th Street.
Dr. Paul Nolan came up with the idea of having an annual bell-ringing ceremony to remember the Addergoole 14 while sitting in the pub.
So I went across, got a ladder and got a rope, came around, and eventually got the ladder up and tied it on there and fell down off my back and all that. And then said, bugger this, so I pulled it a few times and it rang. So then I went back into the two pubs. I says, come on, we're all going to come up with me and we're going to ring a bell. We're going to ring a bell and we're going to have the noise going across the whole lake and around the mountain. We're going to ring the bell. This is our day.
Internationally recognized Titanic expert Alex Klingelhofer has traveled to Ireland to share artifacts recovered from the Titanic wreck site with relatives of the Addergoole 14.
Thank you for coming this evening. It's my pleasure to be here. And I have one artifact that I brought that shows the extension of the Irish culture throughout the world. So it's a small little piece of art pottery. It has the shamrock on it. And so I thought that would be at least speaking to the Irish culture that so changed the world. I mean, I know in America, where I'm from, the Irish started coming in the mid-19th century, and they really changed the landscape of our culture, and so they're very important to us. So I was trying to think of something that would really speak to the 14. So I thought about their daily lives. What did they do every day? They had tea. What did they do on Titanic? They had tea. These are third-class teacups. It's just a cup, but it can remind us of the larger story of the Addergoole 14. Maybe one of your people held this. Maybe one of your people drank from it. You are keeping these stories alive, and therefore the legacy of Titanic alive, and that's important. And I'm glad you all came together because learning from you about the 14 who were on Titanic. It's important. They're not just names on a memorial wall, but they actually have some sort of view of their life behind that name.
No other place in the world suffered such a great loss in the Titanic as did this parish here, in the parish of Addergoole. And that is why they are remembered by the community now every year. It was such a sad, terrible thing to happen that each family lost a relative, was absolutely saddened. But then some years ago, we came together and formed the society. The whole community now expresses their loss.
Memorials like these have played an important role to honor and remember those who were lost on Titanic.
Boats went out and recovered many of the bodies that were floating on the sea, including my great-grandfather Isidor's, but they did not ever recover Ida's body. Isidor was brought back, and they found in the vest that he was wearing a locket. And that locket was given to my mother, who in turn gave it to me. It's a small locket that is gold with an onyx face with the initials I.S. Isidor Straus engraved. Inside the locket, two pictures. One of his eldest son, Jesse, and one of his eldest daughter, Sarah, my grandmother. And this will remain as an item by promise throughout the generations of our family. People have sometimes asked me, if it were you, would you have made the decision that Isidor did? And I have to say, I don't know, but I'd like to think I would.
Oh, the water is black, and my heart is somewhere in the sea.
Well, tonight, a group of people will get together at about 2 o'clock in the morning.
On the night tide, Titanic sailed.
There'll be a candlelight procession right round the church.
We sat by the fireside.
There'll be a few words spoken, few prayers said to remember those people who were so tragically lost.
My love waits for me.
Now, the ship was sinking from 2:20 until 2:45. So the relatives of the 11 who were lost will each go to the church bell.
Firstly, I would like to call on Frank Gibbons, who will toll the bell for John Burke. I invite Tommy Canavan to ring the bell for Pat Canavan.
Now, that has been done every year for quite a number of years. And hopefully that the community will continue to do that and remember those people for many years to come.
The sinking of RMS Titanic is distant history, yet to some, it is as relevant today as love. You see, love and the loss of love has no expiry date. This collection of artifacts reminds us, inspires us, that in the face of enormous tragedy, in the end, love is what remains.